20-minute conversation and then open it up to questions from you. So I wanted to start, Virgil, when Michael first invited you to do this show, which was now many years ago. I was curious to know, as somebody who sort of has access to so many platforms that are so visible, whether or not it's through fashion or through music, through design, what did you feel like the space of a contemporary art museum could sort of offer to you at that moment in your work?
I think like sort of embedded in that question is the answer. Contemporary art museum, like what is that? Is it a institution that represents today? I think the word contemporary is in it, so that already sort of leans us to what's happening now, as well as like contemporary art museum doesn't mean sort of like housing icons of 30 years ago and having people revisit things that they already know. But as well, for me, when I was younger and I looked up at these institutions, you look up at the mountain and you sort of wonder, what does it take to get in to the top of that mountain? You realize that institutions have like a barrier of entry, and art in that sort of way works if there's a feeling like you don't get it or you don't belong or it's not exactly. That's kind of what makes the walls stand taller. So my practice is very much like looking through the journal and sort of like my investigation of an institution, so that what's inside looks like what I see outside. And I do that within fashion, I do that within music, painting, sculpture, film. It's all an effort to sort of make the inside look like the outside.
And so one of the ways that I see you doing that in the exhibition is that on the one hand, you all came together and you decided to use this sort of frame of fashion, music, and design. So these sort of spheres that you are all about skating between and trying to figure out the holes between them and poking holes between them. And it's interesting in the exhibition because many of the works could kind of fit in different sections. And we did some reshuffling as we sort of installed it and thought about it for Boston. But I wonder about sort of how you came up with, how you decided that medium or those sort of spheres would be a structuring device for the show for 3 of the sections. And then I also wanted to ask about 2 other sections, early work and Black Gaze, which have more of a kind of biographical and a little bit more about you as a person. So maybe first, Michael, just sort of how did you come to those spheres? What did you hope to sort of, by defining the undefinable of Virgil's practice, what did you sort of hope to bring to it?
I think in some ways at that time, Virgil, his star in fashion was so strong. We really didn't want people to forget that you have an engineering background, that you have an architecture background, and that those aspects of your work and your thinking are always present. So just to kind of to show you being super multidimensional, and that there's always music going on too, and stage design and DJing and all that. So trying to really kind of get away from Virgil as off-white Louis Vuitton designer and really show this more complex creative person, I think is sort of probably what led us to that. And then those categories kind of allow that to be clearer to people, to the audience, so that it wasn't too mushy and kind of ambiguous, I suppose.
Kind of defining the spheres to figure out where you've poked holes. In a way.
Yeah.
And what about this? The show begins with a section called Early Work, and then kind of in some ways the beating heart of the show is a beautiful gallery that's called Black Gaze. So I wonder for you, the kind of early work, it really situates you. We have this new work, which is like a half-pipe skate ramp. There's a lot of sort of artifacts of urban architecture, sort of like the street in that early work, your basis in graffiti. So what were important for you in sort of that early work section to signal is like, this is the foundation, like this is me as a teenager growing up in Chicago, that is the basis upon which I've built?
Yeah, like the essence is like discovery. You're born and you're trying to figure out your identity, and you figure out I think one of the sort of first primal senses of a human being is sort of like figuring out where you're at, not only like metaphysically, but also society-wise. And, 2020 is the lens at which you can see the sort of the evolution of blackness. And sort of we now have another renewed sense of like, just the weight that carries. So for me, the early work was like just sort of understanding if I was a consumer or a producer. Because when you look outside, you sort of realize that sort of like black culture in a way is just sort of like a pass-through. There wasn't many icons in fashion design art that I could look up to, but within hip hop, it was bountiful, So if you study the early work portion of the show, you see, one of the newest works that I've done is this half pipe that's in reference to just seminal moments in, Jay-Z, Pharrell, and the sculpture made of that moment that was like a watershed for me to say, we're not just as a culture, just happenstance. That it is a canon of its own. And in general, like my work sort of goes through with this confidence to say that my propositions as a canon of art are largely like undocumented. So that's why this process feeling happens. And that's why, I'm sort of like highlighting my own book about important things, the Chief Keef Supreme, like, or the Black Gaze. It's just really that awakening moment as I've gotten older and as I've seen the world evolve, the immense amount of, I don't know what you'd call it, like sort of my career in art is very much about proclaiming the sort of like self-endowed ability to recontextualize my culture, where I come from, and how things are made.
I think the Black Gaze Room too really was a way to also show that your work has been political from the beginning. There's this undercurrent of social critique that's there, and to also just not let people forget that, because it's so easy to see the fashion shows, see cool people wearing the clothes in boutiques, but like there's this critique where you've been poking at the bear for a long time, and I think that's really important too.
Yeah, it's really the crux of the work. This understanding, obviously, like race is one of these things that is in the air, but the bit of magic around my work is that it's so in the DNA that it doesn't live on the surface, and that's by choice, and that could be critiqued in its essence. But for me, that's where the mountain builds. Like that's the foundational support to be omnipresent. When I was in architecture school, I was looking at Andy Warhol, I was looking at Donald Judd, or I'm looking at just others like seminal artists of that period, and seeing how free they were to sort of do anything. And I said, let me think about my contemporary culture and start building these nuances where like greater ideas can stand.